Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. South Carolina just wrapping up their 2023 spring game. The boys are going to talk a little bit about what we saw. And before we even get into it, just want to say thank you to the South Carolina fans. We've been talking a lot of them on the recruiting trail. We've been talking a lot of South Carolina football in general. They've been making noise in the transfer portal. Shane Beamer, one of our favorite coaches, not even an allegiance to South Carolina, like born in Rochester, New York, didn't go to South Carolina. Follow South Carolina on Instagram, and I absolutely love the South Carolina Gamecoks program, trying to make it out for a game. But again, just want to say to the fans, the South Carolina fans, like, you guys have been absolutely awesome. It's been a blast talking about you. Phenomenal environment, some of the best fans in college football. So appreciate all the support you guys are showing. If you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, I'm going to kick this one off to you. New offensive coordinator, but Spencer Rattler's back. What are your overall feels on this spring game and some of the players that were standing out to you here?
I think the main positive is that Spencer Rattler looks really comfortable at South Carolina now. And you saw him get comfortable towards the end of last year when they showed the chart during the spring game. His numbers improved drastically, especially with the last 3 games. And I think that's what you saw. You said no throwing off the back foot. The ball he's driving the ball. Like, he just looked like what you kind of expected to see from him at Oklahoma when he came in as that really high profile recruit. So I think that's the most encouraging thing is he just looks like he's in command of this team. He looks like he's comfortable and he looks like he's like kind of accepting more of the leadership role now that
I couldn't agree more. Spencer Rattler looks comfortable on the field, but more importantly, like comfortable off the field. And like watching quarterback one, like QB1, and seeing what Spencer Rattler was like as a 17-year-old kid to what he's now as a 5th-year senior, like this South Carolina program has done just so much for me. You can't think of a better head coach for him to be around than Shane Beamer. Just positive energy all the time. I think it's a great spot for him. And on the field, he looks very comfortable. I mean, Spencer Rattler, one of the most talented arms in football 2 years ago. We're talking about him being the #1 quarterback off the board in the NFL draft. I will say, like, one thing that is vital for this team heading into 2023 is that offensive line. Spencer Rattler, part of the reason why, in my mind, from watching all these South Carolina games, that he struggled so much to begin in 2022 was just that offense line couldn't protect him. I mean, he was off his spot, kind of trying to break the pocket. Even going back to Georgia State game, like Georgia State, like South Carolina struggled to block Georgia State. How are they going to block some of these teams in the SEC? The offensive line got better as the year went on. I think that's why you saw the numbers get better for Spencer Rattler. But the offensive line, if there was one thing that you want to see get better as you head into 2023, it is that offense.
Now, I will say, the one caveat to that is I'm kind of skeptical of why teams would ever break their offense.
I agree. I don't like it.
And in the way that I get the idea, because it does make the game more fun when you do the drafting and you kind of create 2 separate teams. But at the end of the day, the way offensive lines played nowadays and the way that defenses run schemes, and there is no like base 4-man fronts that rush in their lanes, and it's like kind of vanilla. Like defenses just change it up. They blitz. They do a lot, and that's so important to have kind of your five guys going. And again, like South Carolina's offensive line did get a lot better towards the end of the year. And I almost don't get like why not just keep that 5 together and give them the practice and I think it could let everyone shine more, although it does take away from the fun. So there's like a trade-off, but
yeah, and you lose some guys from last year, but I also think, and you make a really good point, like Dowell Loggins coming from the NFL, a lot of NFL protection, which is a lot of communication needs to happen on the offensive line. A lot of the pressures you saw in the spring game tonight had a lot to do with like, okay, well, yeah, maybe there was a few tackles that I think just got beat one-on-one, but a lot of it was just communication on stunts and blitz pickups. I would expect that to be better as they get into August camp and as we roll into the 2023 season. I do think that is vital, though, because when you saw Spencer Rattler truly start to cook in 2023, like play at the Heisman level caliber player he is, it was because that offensive line got meaningfully better and the wide receivers started to get a little bit better. And I can't say how excited I am for a guy like Trey Knox to be in this program. They used their tight ends so effectively. And as good as Jaheim Bell was as an athlete last year, as a pure tight end, with like the size wasn't there. He's only 6'2". And so Trey Knox represents a massive target over the middle field, over in the flat. I think Trey Knox is going to fit this offense beautifully.
And that was another encouraging thing. Antoine Wells looks like he really came on last year. He looks like
he's so good.
We talking first round pick. I don't know if that's like that crazy given how good he's playing right now. And
having that battery of that quarterback one, wide receiver one connection, we talked about it with Texas, like Quinn Ewers and Xavier Worthy, creating that like kind of dynamic duo, if you will, the battery of a quarterback and a wide receiver. That's going to be a special battery. You saw it emerge last year. You also have some other guys you feel really, really good about, right? Xavier, again, is like just really big. He's really fast, and Spencer Rattler throws a very nice deep ball. I expect that to be. And then Eddie Lewis, the transfer from Memphis, kind of a smaller guy who's just going to get open underneath. The wide receiver group is rounding out, and Spencer Rattler surrounded by some pretty good athletes. I think the one question mark you have is that running back position, losing a guy like Marshawn Lloyd, Christian Beal-Smith, who's going to kind of emerge as that bell cow at the running back spot.
Yeah, and that's going to be that is true because they did lose kind of their guy.
Marshawn Lloyd was drafted.
And it will be interesting. I mean, I thought like DeCarrion Joyner.
That's interesting.
I'm interested to see what they do with him because I don't necessarily think like pure running back, but again, a guy who catches the ball really well, obviously really good in space. Like they have the skill at running back. It just will be interesting to see how they use it because you're kind of right. They don't have that guy to just take 20 carries between the tackles and be.
I do think Mario Anderson could be that guy. I mean, he looks the part, like big lower half. He runs physically, and they said on the broadcast he's the most natural running back. And you have Juju McDowell and Joyner as kind of like the spacey guys, the guys who are kind of a little bit different tone than Mario Anderson runs the ball. Now, I do want to backtrack a little bit because we forgot to mention arguably the most exciting weapon on the South Carolina offense heading in 2023. Has not put on a South Carolina helmet yet. But Nick Harbert, I mean, a guy that has Michigan fans, we wanted up in Michigan. How South Carolina uses these tight ends are just bigger wide receivers. I don't know if he's going to be lining up in line like traditional tight end, like getting him out in the flat. Like give this guy the ball in space. He's the biggest and fastest player on the field. I'm very excited because he's a guy that has the traits to be a year one impact dude. I can't wait to see how he fits into this offense.
And you got to think they're going to use him. Like teams are just playing young skill guys. Because again, if you can really fly, like it's not like transitioning into playing like offensive line where it seems like it's much harder to make that transition from high school to college. But like Nick Harbert just, I mean, really flies. You're big and fast. You're just you're a problem.
And he's the biggest and fastest as they come. On the defensive side of the ball, I was very impressed. I thought the defense looked better, especially up front. And the nature of the spring game is it's really hard to tell, like, okay, is the defensive line meaningfully better? Is the offensive line struggling? But a couple of guys that really jumped out to me, Brian Thomas Jr., he's special off the edge. Like the burst he has to get around tackles is next level. Another guy I had written down, Elijah Davis, a JUCO transfer, more of a bigger body guy that's going to go right through tackles. But this defensive line, I think, should have been better last year with guys like Zach Pickens and Jordan Birch, who Zach Pickens going to the draft, Jordan Birch transferring to Oregon. A little bit underwhelming. This group up front, I was very, very impressed in terms of the pressure they were able to get off the edge.
And that'll be a key thing again. And even probably more so is they're just going to need to be tougher up front and especially in the middle because that's where you saw like when things go really poorly for South Carolina, they just are getting body blowed. And
yes.
And I think that'll like, again, that what they are like, they had a lot of talent to kind of turn over from the past eras. Like they just didn't have a ton of guys. And I do think they're starting to, obviously the recruiting trail is really eating up and they're starting to get their guys in place. And I'd like to think they're going to start developing the guys into like play. If they recruit a really good player, he's going to play really good in college. And that just, you weren't seeing that enough because you even had talented D linemen and they never reached their peak. I mean, Birch and Pickens never played up to the level that they came in to as high schoolers.
And a lot of that has to do with, and I think a lot of people kind of forget about this, a lot of those guys weren't Beamer's guys. Like he kind of just was indoctrinated into them. So Beamer now getting a couple recruiting classes under his belt, and the recruiting's just getting better. They talked about it on the broadcast, but we've talked a lot of South Carolina recruiting. Like he's starting to win a lot of big-time recruit battles. He's starting to get a lot of talent on campus. So you feel really good about the depth of this program and the amount of talent they're going to have moving forward. Another thing, spring game related, that I thought was extremely impressive is that secondary. I was when you lose a guy like Cam Smith, who's arguably a first-round player, Darius Rush, probably a day two player, two really, really good cornerbacks, you're concerned about how are we going to cover some of these wide receivers in the SEC. South Carolina has some good wide receivers, and they weren't creating that much space. Like, I thought the guys in the secondary, I don't know where they're getting them from because they're just long and athletic dudes. That secondary looks about just as good as it did look last year.
Yeah, and that's really important. I mean, you need to have cornerbacks you can rely on. So the fact that they're able to roll that, I don't know if that's indicative for the way the program's going to go moving forward, where they're just going to be, just developing guys steadily. It's not.
I just couldn't believe like these guys looked apart, and like a lot of the guys like I wasn't that familiar with, and I have to do some like preview reading on. But like those guys looked really, really good, and I was really kind of intrigued because you're going up against some really good wide receivers that South Carolina has on the offense side of the ball, and there was not a lot of wide open throwing lanes. Like if you were beating, if they were winning on the offense side of the ball, it was due to some really good throws and some really good catches. It was not like defensive blown coverages.
Yeah, that's again. To me, like South Carolina, probably not quite in win now mode yet. Although I do think, with a guy like Rattler, if he really
that's the thing
and plays really good football, like they might move themselves ahead of where it kind of have them, like maybe like 2-3 years down the road when the Beamer classes start getting to be juniors and seniors, is like maybe that's when you really expect to like start competing for the SEC East and then for SEC titles and so forth. But yeah, I mean, it is interesting because they do have Rattler, and Rattler like kind of looks like he's filling into what he needs to be to make them really competitive.
Yeah, and again, this program is still building up, but you got to feel so confident in the direction it's going. And I've talked about this when I'm talking South Carolina recruiting. Like that team in 2021 probably didn't have any business going 7-6 and beating a team in UNC and Sam Howell in the bowl game. Last year probably didn't have as much business being as good as they were, but they just keep winning games. Like I think the winning culture that's being established in South Carolina is special. Now, I do want to close it out on just impact transfers. Like, where would you like to see South Carolina go in terms of, you see a ton of names hitting the portal?
Whoever that kid is from Oklahoma State that was starting left tackle at Oklahoma,
ETN would be nice.
Feels like you have to make a run at him and probably any offensive line that comes aboard, because this is, at the end of the day, this is where South Carolina has been kind of weak for most of Beamer's tenure. And in just given the fact that you have a guy like Rattler, I think if you can just keep him relatively clean,
he's going to make some plays.
You're going to have a chance to win a lot of games. If you can't, it's going to probably be, last year was a really great year, but obviously those results, you want to get better moving forward.
They left some meat on the bone because of that offensive line, I thought. And there's some other positions that you got to get better at, but I thought the offensive line was where they struggled in the most. They grabbed 2 transfers already, and you see Shane Beamer, like, we need to establish the trenches better than we have been. You go out and get Josiah Thompson, Cam Pringle, 2 of the best tackles in the 2024 class. Like, you see Shane Beamer seeing that we need to get better.
You're probably just, like, again, it's like, I get that's big to start building the recruiting, but in this day and age, if you can just roll through some really competitive players who at an Oklahoma State-like program that's kind of feels like it's not really on the rise in any sense, and it doesn't, not a ton of momentum that a really good player would want to stick around with it if it's his last year. Again, I think you start making runs at South Carolina should be a place people want to play, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, when I 100% agree in it. You're looking at, you said it best. Like Spencer, you have a year where Spencer Rattler looks really good. You have some really good wide receivers. Go out and take some big swings on some offensive linemen in the transfer portal. Get him cleaned up in that pocket, because this offense could be really good. Like if they pick up where they left off at the end of 2022, this is one of the better offenses in the SEC in the country. So that's probably where I'm going if I'm South Carolina in the transfer portal. We'll see what names pop up. And of course, if they do end up coming to South Carolina, we'll clip this, say, let's ride Shane Beamer, listening to the Rock Boys. But again, just wanted to keep one short for you guys, but watching the South Carolina game, phenomenal environment. It's always a fun team and program to talk about. You guys have been absolutely awesome. So again, if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.